Hello, everybody. This is Mike History 2, and welcome to my second series, The United States versus the United Kingdom. And so, someone asked me to compare the United States versus the United Kingdom to see who was worse, and so this series will be attempting to answer that. And so, to start off, I'll talk about the United Kingdom. The main atrocities that the United Kingdom caused were its famines in India. Although almost nobody has ever heard of it, it was one of the worst disasters in history. I'll start to do it in order from least to most devastating and not in chronological order. The Agra Famine of 1837 to 1838 was a famine in the northwestern provinces in the United Kingdom that affected 8 million people. By the end of 1838, around 800,000 people had died of starvation. The 1837 summer monsoon rains filled almost entirely in the region of the Doab. During August and September 1837, there was both a severe drought and a failure of the autumn harvest. By 1838, the monsoon rains had failed as well, and no spring harvest was expected. From the beginning, the British only provided relief for able-bodied people. Everyone else was left to die. The Indian Famine of 1896 to 1897 was a famine that began in Bundelkhand in India early in 1896 and spread to many parts of India, including the United Provinces, the Central Provinces in Bihar, parts of Bombay and Madras, and parts of the British vassals of Punjab, Rajputana Central India Agency, and Hyderabad. The famine affected 69.5 million people. Around 1 million people died because of the famine. Bundelkhand got a drought in the autumn of 1895 as a result of poor summer monsoon rains. When the winter monsoon failed as well, a famine started early in 1896. However, the summer monsoon of 1896 barely brought any rain, and soon the famine had spread to the United Provinces, Central Provinces in Berar, and parts of Bombay and Madras, Bengal, and even Upper Burma. British vassals that were affected were Rajputana Central India Agency, Punjab, and Hyderabad. The summer monsoon rains of 1897, however, were abundant, as was the following harvest, which ended the famine in autumn 1897. However, the rains, which were particularly heavy in some regions, set off a malaria epidemic which killed many people. Soon after, an epidemic of the bubonic plague began in Bombay, which, although not very lethal during the famine year, would in the next decade become more virulent and spread to the rest of India. Only 2 years later, there was the worst Indian famine of there was the Indian Famine of 1899 to 1900, which affected a population of 59.5 million people. Famine was worst in the central provinces in Berar, Bombay, and Ajmer Merwara. British vassals that were affected were Punjab, Rajputana, Central India, Hyderabad, and Kathiawar. In addition, small areas of Bengal, Madras, and the northwestern provinces were afflicted by the famine. The population in many areas had barely recovered from the famine of 1896 to 1897. As in that famine, this one too was preceded by a drought. There was a lot less rain, and there were also large crop failures in the rest of India. Around 1 million people died of starvation or accompanying disease. In central provinces in Berar, an area that had suffered extreme starvation during the famine of 1896 to 1897, 1898 had been favorable agriculturally, as was the first half of 1899. However, after the failure of the summer monsoon of 1899, a second catastrophe began soon afterwards. There was a rapid rise of prices, and the autumn harvest failed completely. After public criticism of the famine relief effort in the previous famine, this time an improved famine relief effort was organized. By July 1900, one-fifth of the province's population was on some form of famine relief. The summer monsoon of 1900 produced some rainfall, and by autumn, agricultural work had begun, meaning most famine relief works were closed by December 1900. Overall, the famine of 1899 to 1900 was less severe in this region than the famine of 2 years before. But in Bombay, this famine was even worse than the last one, and this was especially so in Kathiawar. Both 1896 and 1899 were El Niño years in which the monsoon rainfall was considerably less than average. The year following the El Niño was not only higher than average rainfall, but also caused a much higher probability of malaria. In 1900, the year following the El Niño, malaria broke out in Punjab, central provinces in Berar, and Bombay. The central provinces in Berar, the death rates were quite low at the beginning. However, by the summer of 1900, a cholera epidemic had broke out, and soon the monsoon rains of 1900 brought malaria. Therefore, the death rate increased between August and September 1900, full year after the famine began. Also, the 19th century was a time where the principle of laissez-faire was common, so many Indian governors didn't bother to intervene in the economy and said that it would fix itself. This caused the rich Indians to steal all the remaining food and money and keep it for themselves. They got rich ripping off the poor and stealing their possessions. However, the government did nothing about it. The Indian famine of 1899 to 1900 was the last of the all India famines. The Rajputana famine of 1869 affected a population of 44.5 million people, mainly in Ajmer in the United Kingdom and the British vassal of Rajputana. Other areas affected included the central provinces in Berar and the United Provinces of Agra and Oud in the United Kingdom and the British vassal of Punjab. The monsoon of 1868 was late. When it came, it was light and short, lasting until only August 1868. Some areas in Rajputana had water shortages. Since the grain could be brought in only on slow camel trains, the areas affected by the famine were isolated. Many inhabitants of Rajputana left. Initially, they did not go to the United Kingdom, where there was some relief works had been arranged, and many wandered in search of food until they died from starvation. Late in 1868, cholera broke out among the people, and there was no harvest in the spring of 1869. In May 1869, many people who had left earlier now returned to their villages, believing that the rain would be early. However, there was no rain until July, and many thousands more died of starvation. Even so, the autumn harvest seemed to be good, but locusts came and ate all the food. In September and October 1869, there were more heavy rains that, although good for the harvest, caused an epidemic of malaria and killed many more. Finally, the harvest of spring 1870 arrived and ended the famine. In total, 1.5 million people died. The Dog Famine of 1860 to 1861 was a famine in the United Kingdom that affected the northwestern provinces, large parts of Rohilkhand and Awadh, and parts of the British vassals of Punjab and Rajputana, and up to 2 million people died during the famine. By the way, does anyone know it's always the same places that get affected by these famines? Anyways, that's it. Thank you for watching. Part 2 will be coming out soon, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget to subscribe to my other channel, The Traditionalist. See ya!